All right. Now, a quick review, some of the topics that we posted in this last week, uh, some of the conversations that we've had posted to YouTube and on the Power Options archive as well. We started off with strategy discussion, dueling covered calls on an ETF, both doing the ETF and the inverse ETF at the same time, a comparison of in-the-money covered calls versus standard collars, where you're still doing sort of a covered call, but you're buying an out-of-the-money put with the same expiration. Part one of the ATM bell curve effect on pricing for spread positions, looking at SPX and the amount of time expected, or I should say the price expected, with only 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days left to expiration. Other review of recent contents, updates to power options and the current market sentiment, and a successful pendulum adjustment and further thoughts on the general market as well. That was all from last week. And coming soon, we've got part two of that ATM bell curve. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then, of course, we'll post today's segments. And there's some other topics that were requested in the after webinar survey from the last week or two that we're working on as well. So you might see as many as 8 videos being posted in the next 5 to 7 days here from today's discussion and other ones that are there as well. Now, I did have some questions come in via email, but it was easier to answer them directly via email rather than go through. But in case you're wondering, I'll go through some of them right now. So some quick reviews we had with questions that came in via email earlier today. Kenneth had asked, is it better to roll out a slightly out-of-the-money weekly covered call on Friday or let it expire for the full profit and sell a new call on Monday? Well, we covered this about 5 months ago, back in September. Salvatore had almost the exact same question. He asked questions about, was a general rule of thumb for letting short calls expire worthless versus closing out and rolling to the new position. One example does not the market make. However, what we saw in that presentation, using Apple as an example and going 2 weeks forward, so rolling from 1 week to the next week and then rolling the next week as well, we saw that we were getting almost 40 cents more premium by rolling on Friday to the next Monday rather than letting the call expire. In other words, if we let the call expire and then Monday went in to sell the same call we were looking at with a subtle stock movement or very little change, we saw that you lost 40 cents in premium. So if my buyback cost for that out-of-the-money call today on Friday is only 10, 15, or 20 cents, and I see that I have the potential to maybe lose 40 cents if I don't roll today, that's a trade-off I'm willing to take. It might be better to roll on Friday. But that's explained in this video, when to roll or let expire an OTM covered call. You can find that on YouTube. And the discussion there about rolling starts at about the 17-minute mark. A similar conversation, or question, I should say, came in from Alice. Alice wanted to know, I'm trying to set up to hedge the market. When I see the VIX is down to 27 today, I'm wondering if I should wait until it is around 20 to set up. What would you suggest? I like to use the spread so I don't need to pay too much. Can a credit or debit spread work for hedging? Should I use VIX or SPY? Well, let me take a step back on that. We did answer her question directly, saying that this video here that was available, also fairly recent, Bear Put Debit as a market hedge, it came from Octavio. And my initial fear, which we covered in this conversation here, this other previously archived webinar, is that the Bear Put Debit on SPY, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, worked really good as a hedge in this example, meaning that I think the market fell about 5 or 6%. And the Bear Put Debit spread that Octavio used did work as a reasonable hedge against that position. And don't worry, we compared it directly to if we had bought VIX calls, if we had bought puts on SPY, or if we had bought shares of an inverse ETF. But my hesitation with using a spread position, if I'm worried about a further market downturn, I know we all are, just based on conversations that we've had, or further market downturns, or definitely uncertain markets, of course we know. But my fear about using a debit spread as a hedge is it might work if the market falls 3, 5, maybe even 7% to help hedge, 40, 50% of what you're losing on the bulk portion of your portfolio, depending on the portfolio size and how many contracts you trade. But if the market gives us a bigger turn and it goes down 10, 12, 15% beyond our expectation, My fear on using the spread is that it's a capped hedge. You can't make more than this value even if the markets fall further. Yes, I'll admit it. In this example that we were talking about here, when the market fell about that 5 or 6%, Octavio's hedge worked just as well, if not better, than some of the other common hedges we might do, buying calls on the VIX or buying puts on SPY. Had it fell further, 9%, 11%, 15%, which thankfully it didn't at that time, those other ones that did not have a capped gain as a market hedge to the downturn would have performed better. So it all depends on what type of movement you're expecting, what type of correction, decline, risk you're expecting as to which hedge might work best. But this gives you a good eye on that, a good eagle eye on that. It's called Bear Put Debit as a market hedge. You can just type that into YouTube there. You'll be able to find that channel. And you'll also see a playlist on other ideas for hedging a portfolio, market hedge, and more. Now, Alice did mention that it's down to 27 today, and we've seen it at 36. We've seen it at 35 with events that are going on in the world. Should I wait till it's 20 to set up? Well, here's the dilemma with that one, straightforward for Alice. Normally what I say to an investor, should I wait if I'm trying to set up a hedge because I'm worried the market's going to turn down? Well, it's always best to hedge sooner rather than later. It's always best to do a market hedge if you have that feeling all of a sudden. It's better to have it in place than to want to have it in place if the market falls sooner than you expected. Okay? This is still high. What do I mean by that? The VIX at 27 is still high, meaning buying calls on the VIX right now is still a fairly expensive proposition. I don't think we're going to see VIX down to 20 maybe anytime soon unless a lot of things fall into place over the next 5, 10 to 15 days. All right? I expect it to stay around 25 to 30 in that range, maybe as high as 35 depending on situations, maybe drop down to 23 or 22, but below 20 I'm not expecting to see. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, that's great. That means the market's going to be going back up. But in any case, what's important there is although the VIX might be too expensive, the idea is to use a spread to hinder the cost of protection with the VIX, of course, naturally. That makes perfect sense. But again, having the capped hedge, if the downturn exceeds your expectation, it might not benefit the position as well as you thought. You might not get as much hedge since it's capped out. It might be better to look at something on SPY, shares of an inverse ETF, or a volatility ETF in that case. All right, so just some general thoughts on that. And of course, moving along, our little last one here. Last week, we discussed for Lisa about the ATM bell curve as it relates to spreads. She had an issue with 2 days to go to expiration. The bull put credit spread she had on SPX was 30 points out of the money, about 0.8%, 0.7% out of the money. With the market at 46.07, she was holding a 45.70 put. And it was still costing about $29, $30 to close out the position. So we did an example of how the ATM bell curve and implied volatility affect the pricing of an out-of-the-money option on a high-priced index or a high-priced stock, even if you're just 1 day, 2 days, 3 days out to expiration. We're going to continue that a little bit later. I started working on the slides a little bit, but I didn't get a chance to finish and record it this week. But we're going to break down the table of what you'd expect being a certain range out of the money or in the money, the extrinsic value you'd expect if you're 5 days out, 4 days out, 3 days out, 1 day out, and so forth, but with different volatilities in play, different implied volatilities in play, which is also going to affect the position. So I just wanted to quickly review those basic questions that came in. We're not going to cover them in depth today, those 2 questions that came in from Kenneth and Alice, because almost identically those questions had been answered recently, 4 months ago or 5 months ago, and those 2 presentations we referenced are there, and we'll elaborate more on that ATM bell curve as it relates to spreads and what you might expect or should expect for the remaining extrinsic value on an option that's right at the money, slightly out of the money, or slightly in the money, even if you only have 1, 2, 3, 4 days to go, monetarily and percentage-wise. So there's a lot of numbers in there, and we're just trying to make it as crisp as possible so we all don't get too confused in the numbers.